Hey YouTube, welcome to Rampage Reviews. I'm Rampage and we are on the original phase of the High Republic era. Let's dive in. So the book that we're reviewing today is called The Light of the Jedi, and it's the first book that was written when the High Republic era was introduced by Disney. This book takes place about 232 years BBY, so it's about 150 years after the events of the Battle of Jeddah. It starts out where there's a ship called the Legacy Run that's traveling in hyperspace with a group of people that were traveling from the core worlds and some colonized worlds in the core and mid-rim out to the outer rim, since it's becoming too populated near the core worlds. During this travel, there's a ship or something that was blocking the hyperlane in front of the Legacy Run. There was a captain on board that was named Cassett. She noticed this blockage in the hyperlane and she realized she had to take the ship and maneuver it out of the way while traveling in hyperspace, which I've never heard of that happening in Star Wars. It'd be interesting to see if that happens in future reads that happen. When she was trying to make this maneuver, it actually stressed the ship out so much that it ripped it in half, and actually ripped it in much more pieces than that, because the pieces of the ship actually ended up continuing to travel through hyperspace and could not stop because the ship couldn't exit hyperspace since it was now disabled. So all of these pieces are now traveling through hyperspace. There's a planet that's introduced called Hetzel, and there's this notion that the Republic has been in positive state for a very long time. No conflicts, except for the local flare-ups every now and then, which are usually quickly resolved, according to the High Republic's chancellor at the time. But now, there is this first emergence, they call it. This is the act of the pieces of the ship actually colliding with a colonized or civilized world. The first emergence takes place on Hetzel, which everybody's kind of freaked out. They're like, what's going on? There's things crashing and things blowing up, and there's this one IT fellow that's looking at a screen, a TV screen or a computer screen, and he's saying, why is there beeping and crazy things going on? We haven't had anything happen in, what, decades? I don't know, years? 100 years? I don't know. They're a little freaked out to see some craziness happen, since they've probably been bored out of their mind for this 100 years or whatever. The crash happens. The Republic and the Jedi are then called to respond and see if they can investigate what happened. During this era, very few people know anything about hyperspace. They don't know how it works. They don't know how the hyperlanes were charted. But the people or the family that pioneered hyperspace travel are the Santekas, which were also mentioned back in the 382 BBY years Battle of Jeddah events that happened. When the Jedi and the Republic are called to respond, they actually end up pulling off this maneuver. They kind of came up with it on the fly. The Jedi were supposed to all band together. They were in different parts of space. Some of them were in orbit, some of them were on the planet, but they were to band together, I guess telepathically, and use the Force to slow down this piece of the ship that they located. They found out that this was the main cabin that had people that were alive in it. One of the Jedi Padawans actually detected this after a minute. It was the Wookiee Padawan, if you're interested in knowing. The Jedi band together to use the Force to slow it down, and then there's a couple of people that have this, I think it's like a transporting ship or something, but it has mag clamps on it. So if the Jedi slowed it down just enough, this ship could fly alongside it, use the mag clamps to throw onto the ship and stick, and then they would use reverse thrusters to slow that piece of the ship down to save those people. They were successful. They find out that the captain of the ship, Cassett, had perished during the event, but they got these people to safety. Now Hetzel was being ordered to evacuate because they know these emergencies are happening. People are in a panic trying to get off world. Later, you have a group of pirates, I guess they would be, called the Nihil. I'm really excited about this group. Reading about them, it's interesting to see this villainous faction evolve. Also, I got this vibe of the Ravagers from Marvel when I was reading this book. That's like the first thing that came to mind. They're like this cyberpunk Mad Max type group that travels through space, and they're just like, all they want to do is make money and have fun, and they're also like doing drugs and stuff on their ship. It's a little whacked out. They introduced this group. Any horrible name you could give them personified it. They were thieves, scoundrels, pirates. They were all of those things. The Jedi and the Republic were investigating this event that happened. There was some suspicion that the Nihil were involved, mainly because there had been whispers about their existence, and there were some clues that led to them thinking it might have been the Nihil. The Nihil go by this symbol that's like red lightning bolts, 3 red lightning bolts in a row. And one of the people that were on the ship that witnessed the crash happening, that's one of the things they saw before the ship crashed, was the 3 red lightning bolts. It was just stuck out to them. So suspicion was gathering for that. but they realized that they had to try to investigate how the crash happened, how many emergencies have happened, and also where they happened, and then also trying to predict where future emergencies would happen so that they can try to prevent the rest of them from happening. And they also wanted to try and see if they could locate the flight recorder that was upon the ship, because that was going to help tell them everything they needed to know about what happened at the crash and who was involved and who was responsible for the crash. They had a feeling it would reveal that the Nihil were responsible for the crash. The Nihil also knew this, and they wanted to also find the flight recorder so that they could escape any guilt from the crash happening. So in order to accomplish what the Republic wants to predict future emergencies, they have this IT guy named Kevin Tarr. He tells the Republic that I need tens of thousands of Navicomp droids connected, synced, working together to calculate all of this stuff I need to know about how the crash happened, where emergencies have happened so far, and where future emergencies will happen. They're able to get him 57,000 droids, which is a lot. He thought he would need about 100,000 because he knows that they're going to get so hot from computing that they're probably going to burn out and that he wouldn't be able to finish his calculations, which he's only going to get one shot at it because he feels like the Republic is not going to give up this many resources over and over again, or more than once, really. Now, you also find out that the Nihil are also able to predict where future emergencies are happening, and the way they're able to do that is because they are able to travel through uncharted hyperlanes due to this person that they have on board. Her name is Mari Santeca. She's like a century old, and she has this ability to mentally find hyperlanes existing within hyperspace, uncharted ones. I don't know if she uses the Force. It's kind of a mysterious ability that she has. They don't go into a lot of detail about it, but she has this ability and it works really well. Apparently, Marchian, who is the leader of the Nihil, called the Eye, he was able to get her on board. I think they keep her alive on this machine, or at least they keep her comfortable since she's so old, and then she continues to chart these hyperlanes for them. He's got thousands of them stored away, downloaded into, I guess, a thumb drive of his, I don't know. And then they're able to predict emergencies since they can travel through parts of hyperspace that the Republic can't. The other thing that they have the advantage of is that the Chancellor had shut down the hyperlanes, at least to a certain point, because of the emergencies happening, and they wanted to make sure that this couldn't happen again while they investigated it. Every time an emergence happened, the Chancellor would move up how far the hyperlane was blocked. So it just gave the Nihil more and more of an advantage since they were able to travel those uncharted hyperlanes. Now, on one side of the book, you have these calculations taking place with those Navicomp computers on Hetzel. There's some issues that happen. The droids do get too hot, and a lot of them fail. Before too many of them can fail, one of the Jedi, in concert with another Jedi, maybe more than that, he uses the Force to gather moisture in the air to then create this water that was above the droids and then allow it to rain on them, which they could still operate in the rain, which we know droids can operate in water. You know, we've seen it happen plenty of times. But it rains on them to cool them down. So then they're able to perform these calculations a lot easier because they're not overheating. Never heard of this ability before, but cool, I'll go with it. That becomes successful. On the other end, there were the Jedi that were chasing after the flight recorder. A couple of Jedi, Loden Greatstorm and his Padawan Bell, with another Jedi named Indira, and this other Jedi that's 300 years old. His name is Porter, and he's probably my favorite character of the book. He's just awesome because they keep describing him as this like ancient force that is old, and he's really good at making good meals. But then when it's time for him to go into battle or to do what he needs to do as a Jedi, he just turns on this like hunter persona, and he's just like serious, and he's just a badass in this moment. And I would love to see that in live action. Almost like a Yoda, but more aggressive, I guess you would say. His demeanor is almost kind of weird because you would assume someone like that might turn to the dark side, but maybe he's like a Mace Windu type of character. At one part of the book, there's a member of the Nihil named Cassiv, and he decides to go rogue and use their ability to predict emergencies to extort another planet. So he just chooses like the nearest planet that looks like they're down in the dumps, would be vulnerable to someone attacking them. So they pick a planet called Iriadu. I can't remember where I've heard that planet's name, but I have. So if you know, put it in the comments for me. Thank you. But he chooses this planet, and then he basically gets them on comms and said, hey, I know how to stop the emergencies from happening on your planet because there's about 3 coming your way. So if you pay me 50 million credits, I will stop them from happening. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. No. So they're like, okay, fine, whatever. So one emergence comes and they were able to predict where it was going to be, and they pointed their gun in the right direction, shot it, boom, it was gone. They said, see, we knew that one was coming there. There's 2 more coming. You better pay me. And they're still like, no, we're not going to pay you. No, we're not going to do it. A second emergence comes. And he's like, okay, fine, then you're gonna get hurt. And this one like landed on their moon, I think it was. Oh yeah, landed on their moon, and who had like 2 billion people on it. And like, I don't know if it destroyed the moon. It did a lot of damage, I know that. So then he's like, okay, I know the third one's coming. You better pay me, you better pay me. And they're like, oh my God, you're a monster. They paid him the money, and he knew where the third emergence was gonna be, but he couldn't get to that spot in time to shoot it down. So he missed it, and then it ended up landing on the planet anyway. And that governor was pissed, and then ends up finding him later and kills him. But anyway, he runs off scared to death because he's got his credits now, but he's scared because he knows he's on their hit list now. So after this happens, the leader, the Eye, Marchian Ro, he learns of this happening, and he tells Cassiv, what the hell? What were you doing? You're an idiot, and is just super upset with him at this point. He's also got this chip on his shoulder because his father, Asgar Ro, who's the former leader of the Nihil, was killed, and he believes that it might have been one of his subordinate leaders, Cassiv being one of them. So he actually takes out his anger on Cassiv because of what happened, and he like cripples him. He like punches him, and he slices his hand off, and he does all kinds of crazy stuff. Cassiv is crippled at this point, and since he taught him a lesson in that moment, he started giving orders to everybody else, all of his other leaders. I think there's 3 of them in total, or maybe there's 2. I think it's 2, and then because they have this rule of 3, where whenever they do a job, they split it 3 ways. And there's certain times when the rule of 3 is applied, and there's certain times where it's not. I think it's applied when they have to use his paths, the ones that he has charted through Mari Santeca. If they use those, then they have to split it 3 ways. If they don't, I think they get to keep it, or they only have to split it 2 ways. I don't know, something like that. He orders his subordinate leaders to different tasks. One of them he wants to try and continue to go. He wants them to steal the flight recorder from the Republic, because the Republic ended up getting it. Then Cassiv, I forget what they had him do, but he was supposed to go to this other part of the galaxy. And when he got there, the Republic was there, like arrived there almost at the same time he got there. So he was freaking out because he was undermanned, and he puts on this fight to try to take them down even though he's way undermanned. He's like pumping up his crew saying like, we're the Nihil, don't fight on their terms, fight dirty like the Nihil do. You know, so they start doing all these unconventional tactics to take down ships, and they're actually doing pretty well for a minute. But the Republic ends up taking them down. Then Marchian takes control of his ship and says, I'm going to give you this ability that gives you an instant win. So they're like, what are you going to do? So he takes their engine that's responsible for traveling the paths that he gives them, and he makes them go into like hyperspeed only within like a kilometer of each other. So it's kind of like they're teleporting from spot to spot. They're like, well, this is kind of effective, but then we don't know, what are we supposed to do with this? Because we can't shoot at anybody because we keep like moving about, you know? So eventually Marchian uses that ability to make them crash into the Republic ships, which some of them were damaged, but then the Republic believed, at least Marchian thought, that the Republic believed that the Nihil were then destroyed, like they destroyed the leader. Marchian did this for a tactical reason, but he also did it for revenge on Cassiv because he's just super pissed at him at this point. Loden Greatstorm, the other Jedi that I mentioned, on this other planet that they were on, they're trying to save this family because they're going to demand a ransom for the family to live, or something like that, the Nihil were. Loden ended up boarding one of the Nihil ships, the smaller ship, and was able to take out the people inside, or at least somebody else was. I think there was 2 of them. Then while they were determining their next move to try to save this person and escape, this other Nihil ship that was in front of them, a much bigger one, I think that had Marchian in it, shot this shell at their ship, which then like inserted a gas inside and knocked out Loden Greatstorm, to which Marchian was then able to capture him and keep him as a prisoner because I guess he wants to learn from him. I don't know. They go through a little talk back and forth for a minute, so I'm interested to see what happens past there. But the Republic then celebrates this victory. They were able to predict the rest of the emergencies. They think they destroyed the Nihil. There's also this thing they've been planning to create called the Starlight Beacon. And this is supposed to be the central hub in the Outer Rim. It's supposed to connect them to the rest of the Republic. And it serves as a hospital, and it serves as a transport station, and it serves as a bunch of other stuff. It's this like all-in-one package hub that people in the Outer Rim can enjoy to be more connected to the Republic. So Boom. Awesome. Great. What did I think about the book? It was a great book. I enjoyed the way it was written. Not as good as Cataclysm. That one was amazing. I really love that book, but still very, very good. I really enjoyed it. And I more so enjoyed it because I like where the story's going to go, and I feel like it's going to get much more interesting. This era is intriguing, so I'm curious to see where it goes with the next couple of books that I read. The Rising Storm being the next one, and then the Tempest Runner, which, as you can understand, one of the ships was called the Tempest, or at least I think that's what their groups are called in the Nihil. I was confused whether that was what a ship was called. I think that's, yeah, their groups were called Tempest. We're called like Tempest groups. Like they had a rank system. Like somebody was the lowest rank was a strike, and the next rank was a cloud, and the next rank was a storm, and then I think the leader was the Tempest, something like that. So that last book is going to be obviously centered on the Nihil, and it's a script book, so hopefully that goes a little better than the Battle of Jeddah. But anyway, definitely enjoyed the book. There's a lot of characters that take place. One that I didn't mention that was involved in helping stop the original cabin from flying into another planet, I believe, or the sun or something like that. Her name is Avar Kriss, and she was a really good Jedi. And then you had Elzar Mann was another one. He's this Jedi that is always trying to find new ways to use the Force, and sometimes he fails, but sometimes he's really good. He's just always tinkering with things that you can do with the Force. And some people are annoyed with him because he's just changing things up all the time, but then other people are like, well, we've learned a lot from him because he's tried a lot of different things, and he's taught us a lot of different things based on what he's tried. So that's a pretty cool Jedi I'd like to see going forward. Loden Greatstorm I mentioned with his Padawan Bell. Forget the Bell's last name, but Indira was one. You got Porter. Forget Porter's last name. It's in there. I forget what his last name is. I really want to see him later on. He seems really cool. I imagine him as this, like, I don't know why, but I imagine him as this, like, Master Roshi character who's, like, but, like, really buff. I think Master Roshi was buff. Like, really buff, but, like, when he's old, he's just, like, you know, hunched over. But then when he's, like, in attack mode, he's just this, like, big buff dude who's gonna, like, take out everybody. Want to see that. That looks really cool. Then you got Marchian, leader of the Nihil. You got Kassav, who's one of the Tempest leaders. There's another Tempest leader, Lorna Dean. That was one of them. The Nihil were all pretty interesting in their own right. And it's hard to kind of like differentiate how interesting everybody was in different ways, because it's just, I felt like the story just gelled well together. You could tell that they all had really interesting personalities, but it was just in these small little spurts that you got to see it, because the story jumped, and it was, which is good. You want to have it fast moving. I like that anyway. You got to see everybody's path in the story little by little, and plus there's like so many people in the book that were focused on. A lot of different people. I haven't even gotten close to naming all of them. There's just a lot of people that they focus on. So it was just a lot of moving parts. That made it really cool. This is a new segment I'm going to include called Things I Found Interesting. I came up with it yesterday. Hope you like it. Pretty cool. It's going to kind of go with the can it mesh with Legends question, because there's a lot of things that I found interesting in this book, and I want to kind of list them all. I've gotten into note-taking. I want to point out different things that seem interesting in the context of what's going on during that time, and also what will happen in the future and the stories that have been told, and how if the story can mesh together. Now, the first one is really interesting because I found some differing information in Legends, but I'm hoping that it can still kind of be warped to still allow a meshing to happen. There's a part in the book where it mentions that Bacta was just invented, but the passage is actually, there was that Bacta stuff he'd been reading about too, some kind of miracle replacement for Juven they were trying to grow on the Prime Worlds. Supposed to revolutionize medicine if they could ever figure out how to farm it in volume, but still, it was all just plants. I don't know if that means that it was invented or if someone else just found out about it, which would be really weird because in Legends it was invented 4100 BBY. So this is 232 years BBY. It's possible that this person just didn't know about Bacta, or maybe they had been using this other plant for so long that they weren't using Bacta, and now that they're going to try to start using it in place of this other plant called Juven. I'm sure there can be some like wiggling of definitions around there that would help the story, but just a point that I found interesting. Also, there are these ships that the Jedi use. They're called vectors, and they're lightsaber activated. So they have to take their lightsaber like a key and stick it in the ship. It lights up the ship in the color of their kyber crystal, but it got me thinking, like, why don't they use that any of the other time periods going forward? Now, yeah, what are you going to say? Because George Lucas wrote it, he hadn't thought of that. I get that, But then why are you going to introduce that into this book? Because that question's going to be raised. This is supposed to be a continuous timeline of stories. So you've got these ships that are lightsaber activated. What happened? Why did they disappear? One theory that someone came up with on Reddit was the Jedi had become so entrenched in war over the years. Episode 1, I didn't think they were at war a lot. There was just the blockade from the Trade Federation happening with Naboo. That didn't seem like a galactically implicating thing, which, you know, if you want to disagree with me, tell me in the comments. That's what I took from it. It didn't seem like they had been at war for a long time, the Jedi or the Republic, really. Things might have been getting more testy to where they maybe were at war longer, or at least headed to war, but they thought that because of this fact, they might have gotten rid of the lightsaber key. They could just use conventional weapons instead of having to do the action of inserting the key to turn on the ship's weapons, then use them. So the ship could be turned on. It was just the weapons would be activated using the lightsaber. That's a pretty decent theory, I think, but interested to see what else you think in the comments. Also, there's a point in the book which is kind of weird. It's just a weird thing that I thought the author might have messed up on. There's a chapter 10. Every chapter name is where it's taking place, and then in this context, it's how many minutes until the cabin of the Legacy run smashes into the sun, which right now it says 50 minutes to impact. But then somebody says, and of course, the densely inhabited moon that said anomaly was going to impact and probably eradicate in, call it 12 minutes. So it's going to smash into this moon in 12 minutes, but the chapter says it's 50 minutes to impact. Mistake? I don't know. Maybe the person there didn't really know how long it was going to take and he made a mistake. I don't know. Also, there's people in the story that keep talking about space wizards, and they're calling the Jedi space wizards. Are wizards canon? Where are their wizards? Are there people that they call wizards that use magic, but it's the Force? Kind of like the witches of Dathomir? I want to know where they know what wizards are. Like, where these wizards, what reference do they have to talk about wizards? I know I'm diving into this a little too deeply, but it's a question that begs to be asked. They said it, I'm gonna ask it. Oh yeah, also the book was incredibly full of metaphors. Like, every single sentence was a metaphor for something, which, you know, metaphors in books are great, but it just felt like it was written in metaphors. Like, everything that happened, everything that somebody did was a metaphor for something. At least that's kind of how it started out. I think it got less to that point later. That's what it felt like. By page 107, it felt like that. After page 114, there's a chapter called The Nihil, which is an interlude in the book. Again, hell is mentioned, and the passage is this. The orbital impact had forced an enormous cloud of vaporized water and mud into the air, and much of that had ionized, causing gigantic lightning storms to flicker across the planet's atmosphere. It looked like some form of hell. Hell was also mentioned in The Empire Strikes Back by Han Solo when he said, "I'll see you in hell," you know, after he was going to find Luke Skywalker. But then it begged people to think, why is hell being mentioned? Hell is a Christian thing. So now you gotta find, well, hell is canon. Where does it come from? And I was able to look it up. This is according to Star Wars fandom, Wikipedia, also known as, and CBR.com I'm looking at. It's considered an unpleasant afterlife that's of Corellian mythology. So it's Corellian mythology of an unpleasant afterlife, which just also happens to be, not going to say mythology, because that wouldn't be the right way to say it, a Christian definition of an unpleasant afterlife. That's what hell is. It's a part of Corellian mythology. So now you know, if you didn't know before. This was also interesting. The Chancellor's name was Lena Soul. She mentioned that just a few centuries back, the galaxy was disconnected because they didn't have hyperlane travel. The passages, I remember when the galaxy was just pulling itself together a few centuries back. We couldn't think about anything but survival, really. We should use this time of prosperity to build something meaningful for the future. To where they're talking about this plan called the Great. At the time, I thought that meant there was no hyperspace travel a few centuries back. Well, that would definitely make it difficult to mesh with legends. I think what they're talking about is, according to their plan for the Starlight Beacon and also creating things that connect everybody more in the galaxy to the Republic, that a few centuries back, that kind of stuff didn't exist. Which you might be able to say that because at various points in history, there was war and conflict, there was Sith empires, and there was republics that fought the Sith empires, and sometimes the Sith empires had the advantage, and sometimes the Republic had the advantage. So it's possible a few centuries back, the turmoil that had taken place created this state where they were less connected. So you could still mesh that somehow. I mean, we had, from the Bane trilogy to 382 BBY had 600 years, so a lot of stuff could have happened. So I can roll with that. There's another interesting part of the book, and I mentioned this before, but at the Nihil, trying to get amped up so they could go on this mission that they were about to take, and they take this drug and they just like smash it. He held up a bulb of Smash, bright blue and soft, with a slim nozzle at one end designed to make the drug accessible to just about every type of gas exchange anatomy in the galaxy. This interestingly sounds like cocaine. that's the biggest connection I could make to what they're talking about. I mean, you had spice already. I don't know how spice was taken, how they use that. Now you got like the Star Wars form of cocaine is canon. Thanks, Disney. There's a place in the book called No Space, which is where the Nihil are based, and it reminded me of Nowhere from Guardians of the Galaxy. Nowhere is where the celestial head was cut off. That's what it reminded me of. I just thought there was some things that people were, I don't know, parodying or taking from to create the story. There's another Jedi in the story named Jorah Millie, who becomes kind of significant at one point. She sacrifices her life to fight the Nihil during that last battle where a cast of ships gets destroyed. And Jorah Millie uses a lightsaber with a purged kyber crystal. One notable Jedi that we know uses a purged kyber crystal is Ahsoka. Now, it says in the book that Jorah Millie took this kyber crystal from a Sith saber that she found, purged it, and then used it for her own saber. Where did this Sith saber come from? At this point, it's been 750 years since the Sith had existed, according to the Republic and the Jedi. It's very possible that this could have been found in the ruins of the Great Sith War, because they do mention the Great Sith War in the book. I can't remember if it's mentioned any other point in canon. I don't remember if they mentioned it in the movies. I don't think they do, the Great Sith War. That reminded me of the war between the Sith and the Jedi in the Bane trilogy. If the Great Sith War represents something else that you can remember, I could always Google it, but let me know in the comments. Just seeing somebody else use a purged kyber crystal from a Sith saber, it stuck out to me because I gotta know where that Sith saber came from. And it easily could have just been recovered from somewhere. The last thing that I have that's interesting was when Kassav was fighting the Republic and Marchion had made it possible for his path engine to just teleport around. This reminded me of light speed skipping. Remember from episode 9 when Poe was light speed skipping to escape the TIE fighters at the beginning of the movie? They were light speed skipping much farther away. It seemed like more than a kilometer, which in the book they describe skipping around just within a kilometer away. So maybe this was kind of the first form of doing that. I don't know. That's just kind of what it reminded me of in the book. I hope you found those things interesting too. A rating for the book. I thought this book was a solid 8.7. Not in the 9s. It was a really good read. It didn't blow me away like Cataclysm did. Really, really good book. I really enjoyed it. There will be a link in the description to purchase this book if you want to read it, which there is always a link in the description for the next 3 books that I'm going to read. So if you want to keep up with me and continue to read books so that you can watch the reviews after I read them, and after you read them, there will always be a link in the description for those books. Be aware if you use these links to purchase books from Amazon, I am an Amazon affiliate, so purchasing it through that link will benefit me and this channel in some way, which thank you, I really appreciate it, but don't do it just to support me and the channel. I appreciate the support, but do it because you want to follow along with me and talk about the books with me so we can expand the conversation in the expanded universe, if you get what I'm saying. If you like the content that you saw today, make sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Really appreciate it if you do. So again, thank you everybody for coming. I really appreciate it. May the Force be with you, and we'll see you on the next video.